introductions and you hear something about working in the George W. Bush administration, it makes me feel like I'm a lot older than I really am. I don't know. Last night, Liz Cheney was in town of all things. I don't know if some of you saw that. She was just here for a Wasatch Speaker Series. My husband and I went and heard her at Broadway Hall, and it was like going back in time. A lot of Cheney kind of family things and whatnot. But I'm super excited to be with you today. I actually love coming to this event, and I love coming because of all of you. This is a very unique gathering in my experience. The eyes and boots on the ground feel that you all have for your businesses and for the state's economy is really impressive. And whenever I come to this event, I'm always mindful of how real this group feels in terms of your understanding of the economy and this experience. So I'm really grateful to be here. Mark Zandi is an economist for Moody's Analytics, and he recently said this very complicated quote, but we have led with it in some of our work as we've gone into 2024. He's basically talking about how economic forecasting is a fraught business. And the economy is really complex, it's always changing, it has nonlinear relationships among seemingly non-rational households, businesses, and governments. It's continually hit by geopolitical, technological, environmental shocks. And then he says, in forecasting, it is wise to remain humble. And it's just such a true statement. And I come to you today with a really humble heart about the economy and trying to bring insights. I reached out to Mark and others at Central Bank earlier this week, and I said, I really want to bring a copy of this short report. This is a summary of the governor's economic report. And so all of you have a copy at your table. And this is in the spirit of being humble, because what you get in this report is just on the back page you get the state's official forecast. So I thought that would be really helpful to you to see what's the official forecast that's advising state governments and the functions of the state. What do they think is happening with CPI and inflation and gross domestic product and population, migration, housing units? It's all right here. You get a few years history, you get an estimate for 2023 since it's a lagging date, and you get a forecast for 2024 and 2025. So really awesome. You also you turn into the first page, and there's the first graph on the upper left. It's called Scenarios versus Actual U.S. Real GDP Growth. But it's showing you some accountability, what this group forecasted last year and then what happened. And what they did is they forecasted three scenarios: a shallow recession, a decelerating growth, and a continuing growth. And guess what? Continuing growth is what happened. The most optimistic scenario is what happened. And I don't even remember what I talked about last year, where I was in this thing, but this is in the spirit of being humble. We had a really strong year nationally, and this morning, I don't know if all of you saw, but the new GDP numbers came out this morning, higher, 3.1, 3.3%. Those are really strong numbers. That's a U.S. number, but that's really impressive. So here's kind of the lead of what I want to share today. We had remarkable resiliency in 2023 in a period where the vast majority of mainstream economists were forecasting a mild recession. The U.S. economy stayed strong, and even in the face of banking turmoil, interest rate, choppiness, and elevated inflation. The forecast for 2024 is something they're calling unsettled normalcy. And that's not something economists would come up with, because my colleague that did. But if you think about it, what they're trying to say there is, the pandemic was a shock. And so then you have to return back to these normal relationships, but we're not quite there. It's unsettled. A lot of talk about the U.S. economy. I just want to make really clear that we're absolutely tied to the U.S. economy. Utah performs better, but we ebb and flow at the same kind of correlated way. So that's something I want to make clear to you. And then there's things we're keeping an eye on: labor force participation rates, immigration, housing, architectural billings, consumer sentiment. I'll show you that. And then I just wanted to reserve the time to talk about something we call the new Utah. Does that sound okay? Okay, we'll keep your attention go through that. This is U.S. real GDP growth going back to 2010. You can obviously see the COVID recession there where it drops down and pops back up. The red numbers are forecasted, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of where we sit. Ignore the negative and the 2021 fake economy that has 6% GDP growth. That's just stimulus money that's fake. But we're sitting there trucking along in the 2 to 3% range, which is very normal in the U.S. economy. Looking closer at Utah, this is how our job growth by industry breaks down. And that leisure and hospitality, that's what we think of as the tourism sector, and it was the fastest growing sector last year. Then you've got other services, education, health services, government with some pretty high growth rates there, construction, and working our way down. The only major industry that lost jobs is the tech sector, or what in this graph is labeled information. And interestingly, that's a 2022 to 2023 phenomenon. The latter part of 2023 and coming into 2024, it's recovered. It's now back in positive territory. So this was, how we saw some layoffs in the tech sector in 2023. It's still being reflected here, but they've come a long way. So a little better than this picture shows. On the demographic side, and I realize this is a complicated graphic, but it's showing you since 1950, where do we get our growth from? Do we get it from migration, or do we get it from births? So that top line, the dark black line that's the highest line, that's the total population change. We typically grow around 50,000 people a year. So you see how that line is about, it goes up and above, but 50,000 is kind of an average in recent years. The red line is net migration. People always moving in, people moving out, but what's the net? And, sorry, that wrong. The red is natural increase, so births minus deaths. And then the light gray that's so up and down, looks like an iceberg, that's net migration. Very volatile. So what's so interesting about this is if you notice on the far right tail end, look at how the red line dips below the gray line, signaling to us that we're getting more of our growth from the outside than we're getting from ourselves. It's very unusual. We've now had 3 consecutive years where net in-migration to our state has exceeded our births minus deaths. Gives you pause, doesn't it? It's really interesting to think through that. So this is a strong economy that's bringing people here. This is declining fertility rates. We don't have as many births that we used to have. And yet we still get strong growth. Where we don't have births, we have migration. And then, everybody needs to pay attention to what's happened in housing prices. I'm going to show you a few different ways to look at that. But this is just the housing price index, Utah and the U.S. This is going all the way back to 1975. The red is Utah, the gray is the U.S. You can see how we're often below the national average, kind of teeter around it. But starting in about 2018, it's like a light switch was flipped on, and our housing prices just started to rise dramatically. Huge surprise that it was this much of a disparity. We now have, if you look at median single-family home prices in our state, we have the 8th most expensive housing market in the country. Just sit on that for a minute. The 8th most expensive on the state level. Okay, and then here's the forecast. This is the same as what you have in here. So good. This is similar to the chart you see on the inside right-facing page. But it's just a various forecasts coming out of state economists, and I mostly wanted to just let you know that there is a forecast that you can use in your business and look at. But I also want to just see at the very bottom of this forecast is Utah average home prices percent change. And you see that big red bar? That's uncertainty. Because what this is a consensus forecast, and it's showing what was the median, and then it's showing what was the range of forecasts. And basically, economists can't agree on that one. And I know a lot of you are in that business, and yeah, it's a tricky business to forecast. All right, a couple of things to keep an eye on. I'm really interested in this graphic. This is labor force participation rates. So the way they think of it is they think, are you at working age? And then are you either working or looking for work? And if you are of working age and looking or working, you're in the labor force. And raised the U.S. So a couple things pop out. First, look how much higher our labor force participation rates are. We are very engaged, active in the economy in Utah. This is a real strength to us. That's one point. Another point, and this is a little nuanced, but there's some, you see those little vertical gray bars that show you recessions? And the width of those gray bars is the length of the recession. So kind of right in the middle, you see the Great Recession. It's a little hard to see, I can tell that. I can see it better on this side than that side. But here's the point. The Great Recession, the COVID recession happened, and people fell out of the labor force, right? The Great Resignation, people left the labor force. And you can see labor force participation rates dropping down in 2020. You see at the very bottom, the U.S. one plummets. And then it starts to come back up. But what I wanted you to see is that the U.S. labor force participation rate still has not recovered from the pandemic recession. It's still working its way back. Unsettled normalcy. And you look at Utah's, and we not only are much higher than the nation, but we're much higher than we were before the pandemic. That's a Utah success story. This is part of our success as an economy. Isn't that interesting? Okay, I also said to keep an eye on migration. So I've already mentioned we've had 3 years now of more migration than births, essentially. This is the history of net migration going back to 1950. But let's focus on more recent periods since 1990. We've had 32 of 33 years of net immigration to Utah. We are a magnet state. We attract people from the outside. And so just think about that, right? This is part of why we have a housing shortage. This is part of why we're racially and ethnically diversifying, because there's so many more people coming to Utah. This is a real interest to us because it both fuels our economy, but also creates growth challenges in roads, in water, in just livability, congestion. So it's super interesting, something to keep an eye on. But I pulled the data for Utah County just because I thought you'd find that interesting. This is the net migration to Utah County. Right now, at a pace of about 10,000 to 13,000 more people moving in than moving out every year. So you're a huge part of the migration story in the state. And then we mentioned to keep an eye on housing. At the Gochnour Institute, we forecast the housing shortage. We look at household formation, new households that are forming, and then building permits, and forecast where we have a shortage. And you can see that we made progress. We think that in about 2017 or so, we were about 56 units short, and we were eating into it. But we now have an age wave coming in of first-time homebuyers that would create a lot of demand for housing, and we think the shortage will go up even more. If you like this data, if it's helpful to your business, go to the gochnour.utah.edu webpage, go to construction, and see the great work we're doing there. We invest a lot in trying to understand housing, construction, and real estate. And then 2 more, just to keep an eye on. I pulled the Architectural Billings Index. So this is a leading indicator because architects get the work first, and then the builders get it next. And this is showing you commercial and residential, and it bumps up all over the place, but you can absolutely, towards the far right, see a tapering of the Billings Index, which is a leading indicator that shows that there's some increased risk out there in construction. This is U.S. data, but still very, very interesting. And then the last thing is just to give you a sense of consumer sentiment. We're out in the field every month asking Utahns, how do you feel about the economy? What do you think about 5 years from now? Is now a good time to make a major purchase? Like a new appliance for your home, a new car. And the University of Michigan does that as well. You can see that it's not recovered yet. Consumers are in a funk, and it's really crazy because they're spending a lot. So they're unsettled, but they're engaging in the economy, and it's a real, this is part of being humble as an economist, you can't quite figure it out. But I will show, so Utah's consumers are correlated with the U.S., but we're still not to levels that we would have been pre-pandemic. So unsettled, normalcy. Okay, I'm reluctant to just with a lot of just data. But I'm really excited to share with you some research that I want to end with, and then we can take some questions. We have been talking actively about something we call the New Utah. And Mark, I thought it would be just great to highlight this for this crowd. So I have to kind of get you thinking like a research analyst would think about Utah to kind of introduce this. So I want you to think for a minute about change, or a trigger point, an inflection point, a tipping point, a crossroads. Just think about you're in one state and then you move into another state. And at the Gochnour Institute, we have 30 some odd analysts, and we come out of the pandemic and we watch data and see things, and all of us started to collectively realize that the ground had shifted, that something was different. And we wanted to put words to it. But one of the first things we had to do is kind of think about when or how do inflection points look. So I'm going to give you an example of inflection points. Just bear with me here. In about 2001, Governor Mike Leavitt made a decision to invest mightily in engineering, computer science, and math education in the state. Made a goal to double the number of engineers and computer scientists. And our state did that, funded it. All our universities were part of it, including BYU. This graph shows you an index of the number of jobs in computer science and engineering for Utah and the U.S. And we create an index so you can compare them. So in 100, we say they're the same. And then we say, in 2000, we say they're the same when the index is 100. And we say, what's happened since 2000? And it's such a compelling look, right? Because you see how much the tech sector has just accelerated here in Utah, in part because of our actions. Fair? And so I call that a tipping point. I've got one more example of it. We always talk about Utah's economic diversity, which is among the best in the nation. Well, it hasn't always been that way. We measure it by an index, and I'm just showing you our state ranking in 1970 was 34th in diversity. By 1980, 18, 26, but between 1990 and 2000, we jumped to be the most diversified economy in the country. Because we had our energy economy, and our construction economy, and our tourism economy, and our health and education, financial services, all those things, but we added tech and medical devices, life sciences in a big way, and this is it. Just one other, I won't develop this one as much, but look at what's happened in tourism. This is skier days and national park visits, and you see that in about 2016, the whole time series changes. This is when Instagram really came to life, influencers projecting our beauty to the world, and then the Mighty 5 ad campaign. Again, actions that create something that's happening. So I'm a believer that pandemics are a resetting point. And this Aradhandi Roy author, I read this quote early in the pandemic and it just stuck with me, but she basically makes the point that pandemics open up new doors. It's a gateway to something new. And so what we were feeling at the Gochnour Institute was that all of a sudden there was a difference in the data, and there had been behavioral change, technological change, demographic change. So we've called that something, so I said put words to it, we call it the New Utah. And we think of 6 transitions, just like I showed a transition to tech or a transition to tourism. There's 6 transitions, 4 of them demographic, 2 economic. We go from a small state to a mid-sized state. We go from a state that was getting most of our growth from ourselves to being a state that's getting it from the outside. We become much more multicultural, older, have this elite performing economy, and then we come on board. So something's good. So just by raising hand, does this interest you, the New Utah stuff? I'm just trying to get us, okay. I mean, the idea is that you can't call a New Utah every decade. I mean, it's a rare thing that these things come together in transition. So just to visually help you see this, this is our rank in population size going back to 1900. We were the 40th largest state. We're now at the 30th largest. That happened between 2010 and 2020. We jumped 4 states to put us up into that middle third. So we're calling that a mid-sized state. All of those states in gray are smaller in population size than Utah. I mentioned to Mark and Matt that on the way down here, I was on a call for something called Big League Utah. That's the effort by the Larry H. Miller Group to bring Major League Baseball to Utah. And they were given an update to an advisory council. Well, you get MLB because you're a mid-sized state, right? You get different things when you come into that category. You get a lot of other things, but you have something you get. I pulled, just to pay the local interest here, I realize not all of you are from Utah County, but I pulled the most recent population growth rates for the top 10 cities. By that, I mean the 10 fastest growing cities. And then you can see Utah County there in the state. So if you look at the bottom, the state grows at 1.7%, Utah County grows at twice that rate, 3.4%. And then you can see some of the others. But look at these double-digit growth rates in Saratoga Springs, in Elk Ridge, in Santaquin, in Vineyard. I'm not sure why Eagle Mountain's not popping up there. I have to double check that. But the point is that you're a hotbed of this growth. You're an outlier, particularly among urban counties, right? We were used to Iron County, Washington County, Cedar City, St. George, Wasatch County growing fast. You're a big urban county that's showing growth rates like the smaller counties. Here's how our mix of migration versus natural increase looks. From 2000 to 2020, you look like the left, where the red is net migration. If you look at the last 3 years, you're the right. So that's different. Yes. And then I don't want people to think that all these people are from California. And so we pull that data and show you here that about 17% of them are, and it's the big gorilla in the West. But the next highest is Texas, 7.2, and then Idaho, 6.6, and then Arizona, 4.6. My daughter went to Arizona State University. I love it because there's like 20 flights a day to Phoenix. The connections are amazing. But here's the other really important point, and this really rang true, by the way, with Speaker Mike Schultz, because he thinks a lot about this data. But about 1 in 4 of the people moving here are people coming back home. So this data shows you the in-migrant by place of birth, and you see that 26% Utah. So a lot of these people, 1 in 4, are returning, which is a beautiful thing, getting our children and grandchildren back. Okay, I mentioned also that we're becoming much more multicultural. I started doing this work in roughly 1990. 1 in 10 were from a racial and ethnic minority in our state. Today that's 1 in 4, nearly 1 in 4. Very different. And then if we look at aging over the foreseeable future, we go from 1 in 10 being over 65 to 1 in 5. Huge change in the healthcare sector, in what kind of housing we build, how we get around, changes the structure of our economy. All right, 2 more. I mentioned that we're an elite performing economy. Mark, we should never short wrap like this in front of a group larger than 10 people. Because it's really complicated, and what do you get at? But it's the best way I know of to show how significant Utah's economic performance has been. So bear with me. It's from 2000 to the present. All of those gray lines are some state in the country, and it's their job growth. It's bouncing all over the place. We're showing every state. The black is the U.S. average. The red is Utah. So if you look between 2000 and 2010, look at how the red line is about the same as the nation, does really well, then it goes into the Great Recession, that's the big drop kind of in the middle. The red line actually goes below the black line. We got hit harder during the Great Recession, pop back up. But the elite economy starts happening in about 2010-11, where you see that red line for all those years staying so steady, so durable. Either top 1, 2, or 3. North Dakota beat us in 1 year, that's the gray line you see up there, but then a few years later it was the bottom, because it was boom and bust, it was natural resources. But this is an elite performance. We go into the pandemic, we do so much better than the nation. We come out so much more quickly, and now we're working our way back up to that elite spot. So this is an elite economy, and it's super important because if we're talking about all these people coming to Utah, this is what gives us the means to take care of it. this is what gives us the means to invest, is they're not coming to a place that is, contracting. They're coming to a place that's thriving and allows us to manage that growth, if you will. And I mentioned that we have the 8th highest home prices in the country. This is the data that shows that. The red is Utah. We were very, reasonably placed. And you can see that now only Hawaii, California, D.C., Massachusetts, Washington, Colorado, and Oregon have more expensive housing markets than Utah. So that's the new Utah. I hope it interests you. I just wanted to get it in here. It raises questions. How do you maintain what makes us distinctive and the things that we value and still have all this growth and change? Growth and change creates anxiety, creates crises, it's tough. And then how do we make sure all Utahns thrive? I think what I want to do then is just pause there. I have a few thoughts about those questions, but I think it's best if I open it up for questions. And my guess is that Seth knows that microphone. Is that true, Seth?
Yeah.
Okay.
One over there and one over there.
So as you think about it, so I wanted to paint a picture of a Utah economy that is still nation leading, that has a forecast of modest growth in 2024, but also a state economy that's going through a massive transition that changes the outlook for who we are, what we should be doing. The legislature has had the same presentation, and they're thinking through all of those questions because of what it means. Okay, let's open up for questions.
Any questions?
Our audience here consists of a lot of lenders and borrowers. And a huge issue in that context is where rates have been and where they're going. Can you give us some insight on that?
In fact, one time we put up that quote about being humble, as the answer. I guess I would just say that it has been a real surprise that rates have been able to go up as quickly as they have, and that the economy has still performed at a strong level, both in Utah and the nation. They talk about the long and variable lags of monetary policy, and I do believe we're still in the lag, right? That we still have slowing to come because of these high rates. But, I think it's been a real surprise. I don't want to say that a soft landing has happened, but it's been a surprise how well we've done. And the new report today with 3% higher than 3% GDP, with unemployment where it's at, with job growth where it's at, the prevailing wisdom is that the Fed, and they're signaling this in their public commentary, that they'll be reducing rates if things hold. They'll be reducing rates by mid to late summer. So my thought there is that we still have some challenges to come, but we're almost through this. Please, sir.
One thing you haven't talked about is water. We live at a desert. Is that going to cap our growth in some way?
Yeah. All of these conversations right now center around the Great Salt Lake. It's super interesting. All of you will know the Great Salt Lake got to its lowest elevation level in recorded history last year. After that incredible snow year, which we were all part of last year, the lake went up 5.5 feet in elevation, and then through evaporation dropped to 3.5 feet is the net gain, which is a big gain, but it's not even close to what it needs to be healthy. The state cares about a healthy Great Salt Lake because we have lakeside industries, so it's part of our economy. It's human health because dry lake bed becomes dust that gets in our lungs. And then third, it's a hemispheric issue for the Pacific Flyway and the ecology of birds that harvest eggs and their birthing grounds there and whatnot. The reason it becomes a big deal on waters is we've got this growing state that needs the water, but we have a major hemispheric responsibility to a dead sea, a salty sea in our state that is hugely important. So I'm proud to say that our state is all over this, in my experience. Speaker Grant Wilson, when he was speaker, made this a top priority, and they have done a 180-degree shift to try to do things to help the lake. Here's how it relates to water demand. So we had that great water year. Remember how we didn't have much flooding? I realize there were places, but you think about it. They now know that the reason we didn't have much flooding, two things. Our reservoirs were so low, they filled them up. It was the most rapid increase in the reservoirs in state history. The other thing they figured out is so much went into the ground. They call it runoff efficiency. And the ground was so dry with this mega drought that the water was able to seep in and recharge. All right. Too long an answer to that interest you. Well, here's the point though. In doing all this, we're learning how to change our habits out of water. 70% of the water in this state goes to agriculture. The state is investing mightily in ag optimization. The other thing that happens is they want to price water differently and conserve water differently. And some combination of those things gives me optimism that water is not a constraint to growth. But it does take our actions. Okay.
Natalie, we have one.
Quick question for you. You did have a graph up there about migration rate coming in. What's your forecast on migration rate not coming in once housing gets too expensive, which we're headed with there?
Yeah. So the way I would answer that is, you notice when I showed you the net migration graph, it took me a second to remember I had the wrong line, but it's like this. It's very volatile, and it's very dependent on economic conditions here and economic conditions in other places. If Utah becomes an unattractive place to live, either because of our housing affordability or our life quality, that will definitely affect those numbers. People come here to retire, they come here to work, they come here to go to school. And by far the biggest part of that is to work. So, it's hard to come here to work if you can't get a home. And so we definitely are mindful of that in our forecast. It's a very hard thing to forecast though. But you'll note that we do have here, under demographics, the second row down is the net migration forecast, and we're forecasting 27,000 more in 2024 and 28,000 more in 2025. So we still see it coming. Okay, any other?
One of the things that seems to be most frustrating in Utah County is UDOT.
Tell me more.
And so, we're in the building industry. We're in Utah County is where I live, but why can't UDOT get on board with getting roads built, getting people up and down corridors? We're advertising all this growth and people coming here to ski and to visit our national parks, and nobody can get around.
Okay. Do you all know the name Jim Evans in this community? He's your representative on the UDOT Transportation Commission. He needs to hear from you because he has the responsibility of representing this region and votes out all of the expenditures that come through UDOT. Listen, I don't know how to talk to that except to say that boy is it a difficult job. We were the fastest growing state from 2010 to 2020. Grew by 18.4%. I'll give you another stat. Since the 2002 Olympic Winter Games, we've added 1 million people to the state. It's so hard to stay on top of that infrastructure investment. And at the same time, as you might know, the state legislature has been giving massive tax cuts. They're going to do another one this year, somewhere between 160 and 180 million. So, it's a balance between having more money in the private sector to do what creates growth in this economy and having money in the public sector that helps manage that growth. So I just point those out to you as two places. Talk to your commissioner and then think about the right balance of tax cuts versus investment. As you know, when we give a tax cut, we're creating current consumption. When we invest in roads, we're investing in the future. I hope that was somewhat provocative. Wherever you want to go. There's one right here for you.
I've got one question for you. There's a lot of our young folks living outside the state because they can't afford the housing. They have good jobs, but can't afford the housing. So how do we balance that?
Yeah, it's the big question. So Our Governor Cox he's used the quote that housing is our number 1, 2, and 3 highest priority. He's set a goal for the number of starter homes that he wants built the next while. The state is investing in the housing preservation. They're investing in first-time home buyers. They're trying, and then they're in a big way trying to use their influence over local government to permit housing that meets the market code for higher density. But here, as an economist, this is the way I think of it. Fundamentally, housing is as a private sector activity. You know, that requires builders to take risks, you know, to do what they need to do, and government just needs to help make it happen. And so, I like the idea of zoning being more friendly to supply, because we need supply, and it's not really government's job to build housing. So that's sort of the, if you have a follow-up.
Yeah, follow-up.
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Governor says he wants to build 35,000 houses in about 5 or 10 years, is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that feasible, gentlemen?
Yeah, so he's mentioning that Governor Cox has set a goal of 35,000 starter homes in the next 5 to 10 years. We're not sure on that. Is that feasible? I think it's absolutely a stretch goal. Okay.
What are your thoughts on, and did you have data on investors buying homes, whether that's outside of Utah or within Utah versus people buying homes? And then what that is doing to our economy, plus one more. How does Utah or your organization think about investors versus home buyers? Do you prioritize one or the other?
Easier for me to do the second question than the first. So our lead housing analyst is a guy named Dayon Eskich. I really recommend you look up Dayon on some of these questions if you're interested. He's got his finger on all the housing research we do. And I'm just, you know, I knew a data point some time ago of how much of our housing was outside investors, but I haven't looked at it for a while, so I'm going to be reluctant to answer that. But on the second part of your question, how I feel about it, you know, I think it's vital that we not be dependent on outside builders to fuel this need. You know, they play a part, but investor-driven construction here, we have to be careful about. And so I think there's a balance we have to meet. Okay, any other?
Right over here, we have one.
Okay, and then we'll go here.
My question is, follow-up with his basically, is the state doing anything to stop investors from outbidding all of the local home buyers, like BlackRock?
Mm-hmm.
Federal government started to put in some stipulations as Utah doing.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it. If they are, yeah, I'm not aware. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate all the info. This is fantastic. Two-part question. With all of the data that you look at, what are you most excited about over the next 10 to 20 years in Utah? And the second part will be, what are you most concerned about?
I have a whole list of concerns. So I'll do those first. And you know, you're saying, what are you most concerned about? Something. You know, water's not my biggest concern because I can see a path. I'm really concerned about mental health. All of the indicators, our youth, our adults, they're trending in the wrong direction. So I'm concerned about mental health. Concerned about homelessness. I rode to this event last night, Gochnour on tracks. You know, I'm on the train, and it's just so evident that we have so many, you know, beautiful people who are at the lowest of the low, don't have a place to live. By the way, there's a path on that one, so I'm optimistic on that one. Another one I'm really worried about is what was mentioned about the congestion. I can't believe what we've let happen in our canyons, in Big and Little Gochnour Canyon specifically. You know, I'm a big-time skier, and it's like detracted from my life quality in a big way. And I talk to all our visitors on the slopes, and it's detracted from their experience here. You know, we're behind the curve. Same thing if you go up to Park City, Kimball Junction, which just backs up, you know, and it's got this combination of visitors and commuters, and there are absolute solutions to these problems. You know, in Kimball Junction, you can do something underneath and take away from a lot of the the local traffic and people that going through. There's an engineering solution, we just have to spend the money. So I worry about life quality, as we grow. Great Salt Lake, it takes a lot of action. So those are some, there's more. Housing obviously is on that list. Here's what I get excited about. And I actually had a picture of it, but I sort of lost my thinking about getting a picture for this. We are America's choice and the international choice for the Olympic Games in 2034. I'm so excited about that. And it's not about the event. It's not about like what happens in 2034. That's beautiful. I think it can be wonderful. I mentioned that 1 million people who are here now didn't experience the O2 Games. And by 2034, there'll be 800,000 more. So it would be a new thing for a lot of Utah. I'm excited about it because it gives us an end game to be working on when the eyes of the world are here. And I can tell you in public policy that is incredibly powerful because nobody wants to host the world and have the lake empty and a hemispheric disaster. Nobody wants to host the Olympics and have homeless camps that are people not being cared for. Nobody wants to host the Olympics and have air quality, inversions at the moment they're here. And so what happens is when we have a collective end game, we get better everywhere. And that's already started. And we have 10 years. So I find that a very powerful, motivating force. And I often talk about the new Utah as we have a responsibility to be keepers of the flame. All that's good about Utah and what we project to the world. And there's flashpoints that we got to get on top of.